100 guests watched Nadine carry the final platter to the table. Her husband, Gerald, suddenly grabbed her wrist and dragged her toward the kitchen. Servants don't sit with guests. His mistress slid into her seat, smiling like she belonged there. The room went silent. Nobody moved. But Nadine smiled back, because inside Gerald's briefcase was something he never expected her to find. And what she did next is something Gerald will remember for the rest of his life. Stay with me, because this story is not what you think it is. The chandeliers in the Langford Estate ballroom hung low, casting warm gold across white linen tablecloths and 100 place settings. Gerald Teague's 40th birthday celebration had been planned for months, every detail approved by Gerald himself. The venue, the guest list, the music, the seating chart. The only thing he hadn't arranged was the food. That was Nadine's job. That had always been Nadine's job. She'd been cooking for 3 straight days, 72 hours of marinating, basting, seasoning, plating. Collard greens simmered in smoked turkey stock, short ribs braised until the bone pulled clean. Cornbread whipped from her grandmother's recipe, the one written on a stained index card she kept taped inside the pantry cabinet. Mac and cheese baked in iron skillets with a crust so golden it looked like it belonged under glass. And the centerpiece, a 3-tier red velvet cake with cream cheese frosting she'd piped by hand at 4 in the morning while the rest of the house slept. When she walked that final platter to the main table, the room erupted. Applause, laughter. Someone whistled from the back. A woman at table 3 said, "That woman is a miracle," and the people around her nodded without hesitation. Gerald stood at the head of the table, wineglass raised, grinning like a man who owned every corner of the room. He didn't look at Nadine. He looked past her, the way you look past furniture. Nadine set the platter down. She wiped her hands on the apron, still tied around her waist. She pulled out the one empty chair at the end of the table and reached for it. Gerald moved fast. His hand closed around her wrist, tight, not gentle, and he pulled her sideways, away from the chair, toward the swinging kitchen door. His voice dropped just enough that the first 3 tables heard every word. "Servants don't sit with guests." The room cracked open with silence. Forks stopped mid-air. A woman at table 6 put her napkin over her mouth. The jazz quartet in the corner let their last note hang and die. A man near the bar shifted uncomfortably in his seat and looked down at his plate like the food had suddenly turned bitter. And then Shayla walked in. She came through the front entrance like the room had been waiting for her, hair freshly pressed, falling just past her shoulders. A fitted burgundy dress that cost more than Nadine's monthly grocery budget. She moved past the tables with a practiced smile, fingers trailing the back of a chair as she passed. And when she reached the main table, she pulled out the chair Nadine had just been dragged away from, sat down, and crossed her legs. She placed her clutch on the table and looked around the room with an expression that didn't ask permission. It assumed it. Gerald's mother, Vivian, was sitting 2 seats down. She didn't blink. She didn't hesitate. She reached over, adjusted the linen napkin beside Shayla's plate, smoothed a crease in the fabric, and said, "You look lovely tonight, sweetheart." 100 people in that room. Not one of them said a word. Not one of them stood. Not one of them looked toward the kitchen door where Nadine was standing with damp hands and an apron still tied at her waist. Nadine stood at the kitchen doorway. She looked at the room, at the people she'd fed, at the husband who'd just erased her, at the woman now sitting in her place, at the mother-in-law who'd welcomed the replacement like she'd been rehearsing the moment. and then her eyes moved to the gift table. Gerald's leather briefcase, monogrammed with his initials in gold thread, expensive, the one he carried to every meeting and locked every night like it held the combination to his entire existence, sat propped between a stack of wrapped boxes and a bottle of Hennessy. Nadine smiled. Not a broken smile, not a sad smile. A quiet, steady, certain smile that didn't belong on the face of a woman who'd just been humiliated in front of everyone she knew. Every person in that room thought Nadine was broken. But the woman standing in that doorway wasn't a victim. She was the only person in the building who knew exactly how this night was going to end. 5 years earlier, Nadine Hollis was standing behind a folding table at Mount Calvary Baptist Church, ladling peach cobbler into styrofoam bowls for the annual fundraiser, when Gerald Teague walked up and said, "Whoever made this cobbler needs to be taken seriously." She laughed. He didn't. He came back 3 Sundays in a row. Each time he stood a little closer. Each time he talked a little longer. He told her she had the kind of hands that could build a home. And something inside Nadine, something that had been quiet for a long time, believed him. They married 7 months later. Small ceremony, big love. Their first apartment was a 2-bedroom on Larkin Street, with a window that stuck and a kitchen so narrow 2 people couldn't stand in it at the same time. But Nadine cooked in that kitchen like it was a cathedral. Every night, every holiday. Every time Gerald brought a colleague home unannounced and expected a 3-course meal on the table within the hour. When Gerald started his real estate consulting firm, Nadine ran the back end. She kept his books balanced to the penny. She organized his client files. She hosted dinners for investors in their home, turning their modest dining room into something that felt like a private supper club where deals closed between the salad and the dessert. Gerald's business grew. They moved to a larger house. He bought a new car, then a second one, then the leather briefcase. That briefcase was the first thing that changed the air in the house. Gerald began carrying it everywhere, to meetings, to the car, to bed. He locked it with a 3-digit combination and never left it unattended. When Nadine asked about it once, casually, while handing him his coffee, he said, "It's business, Nadine. You wouldn't understand." That was the first time he'd spoken to her like she was a stranger, standing too close to something that didn't belong to her. It wouldn't be the last. The shifts were small at first. A receipt for a restaurant she'd never been to, dinner for 2, charged to a credit card she didn't recognize. A phone that buzzed at midnight and was silenced before the second ring. A cologne she didn't recognize on the collar of his dress shirt, sharper and sweeter than anything he'd ever worn for her. Nadine noticed all of it. She cataloged each detail the way she measured ingredients, precisely, quietly, and from memory. Then came Vivian. Gerald's mother had always been polite, but distant, the kind of woman who smiled at Thanksgiving and vanished by New Year's. Now she started visiting weekly. Her comments landed like soft grenades, wrapped in sweetness and designed to wound. "Nadine, you should really get your hair done before Gerald's next dinner. First impressions matter. A man like Gerald needs a woman who can keep up with the circles he's moving in. I'm sure you understand. You're a wonderful cook, sweetheart, but a wife is more than a kitchen." Nadine absorbed every word without flinching. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She stored each comment the same way she stored the restaurant receipts and the midnight phone calls, in a mental drawer she hadn't opened yet. But the drawer was getting full. One night, about 6 months before the party, Gerald fell asleep on the couch with the briefcase on the floor beside him. The combination lock faced up, and the overhead lamp caught the dial at just the right angle. Nadine was walking past on her way to turn off the lights when she saw it. 0914. September 14th. Their wedding anniversary. She stopped. She looked at the briefcase. She looked at Gerald, sleeping with his mouth slightly open, one hand resting on his chest like a man without a single care in the world. She filed the combination away in the same drawer with everything else. She didn't open it. Not yet. Around that same time, Gerald started mentioning a name. Shayla. Shayla pulled some great comps for the Eastland deal. Shayla's got a sharp eye for contract language. Reminds me of somebody I used to know. He said that last part while looking at Nadine. He smiled. She didn't. He spoke about Shayla the way he used to speak about Nadine's cooking, with warmth, with admiration, with the kind of energy that told Nadine the drawer was about to get very full. But Nadine said nothing. She poured his coffee, kissed his forehead, and waited. Because Nadine Hollis was not a woman who reacted. She was a woman who remembered, and a woman who remembers everything is the most dangerous person in any room. 3 months before the party, on a Friday night when Gerald said he was flying to Atlanta for a weekend investor meeting, Nadine sat alone in his home office. The house was dark. The only light came from the desk lamp Gerald never turned off. The briefcase sat on his chair where he'd left it that morning, combination lock facing the ceiling like an invitation she'd been patient enough to earn. She turned the dial, 0914. The latch clicked open. Inside, beneath a folder of property listings and a calculator, Nadine found a manila envelope with no label. She opened it and pulled out a stack of documents that made her hands go still. Property transfer papers. 3 of them. Every rental property she and Gerald had purchased together over the past 5 years. Properties she had helped research, helped finance, helped manage. Properties where she'd walked through with contractors and negotiated repairs while Gerald sat in the car on phone calls. Had been retitled. The new ownership entity was something called Teague Marshall Holdings, LLC. The co-signer on every document was Shayla Marshall. Nadine sat with that for a long time. She read each page twice. She checked the dates. She checked the signatures. She ran her finger along the notary stamp and felt the raised seal press against her skin. She turned to the next page. A prenuptial amendment, pre-drafted and unsigned. The language was dense, but the intent was simple enough for anyone to understand. If Nadine signed, she would forfeit her equity claim on every property in the LLC. She would walk away from a marriage with nothing but the clothes in her closet and the recipes in her head. The amendment was dated 3 months in the future, timed, she realized, for right after Gerald's birthday party. He was going to soften her with the party, make her feel included and valued, and then slide the papers across the kitchen table while she was still riding the high of being appreciated. But the worst was at the bottom of the envelope. A bank statement, not Gerald's, Vivian's. Gerald's mother had co-signed a personal loan for $62,000. The loan funded a lease on a luxury apartment downtown, an apartment listed under Shayla Marshall's name. The deposit had been paid 3 months before Vivian started visiting every week. 3 months before the comments about Nadine's hair and her clothes and her inability to keep up. Vivian hadn't been visiting to give advice. She'd been visiting to prepare the ground. She'd been softening Nadine's confidence the way you loosen soil before pulling out a plant. Nadine closed the envelope. She placed every document back in the exact order she'd found it. She locked the briefcase. She wiped the surface with her sleeve and placed it back on Gerald's chair at the same angle he'd left it. Then she sat in Gerald's desk chair and stared at the wall for 45 minutes without moving. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't call her best friend. She didn't throw a single thing. She sat still and let the information settle the way flour settles in a sifter, slowly, evenly, until the weight was distributed and the mind was clear. Then she picked up her phone and made one call. "I need to speak with someone at the county clerk's office. I'm inquiring about property transfer filings under the names Gerald Teague and Shayla Marshall." The call lasted 11 minutes. When she hung up, something had changed behind her eyes. Not anger, not grief, something closer to architecture. She was building something in her mind, and she had just found the foundation. The next morning, Gerald came home from his Atlanta trip. Nadine had breakfast waiting. Eggs over easy, turkey bacon, toast cut diagonal, the way he liked it. He sat down, kissed her cheek, and told her the meetings went well. He said he'd closed a deal with a new investment group. He was lying. She knew he was lying the way she knew when butter was about to burn. By the smell, not the sight. She smiled and poured his coffee. She didn't ask a single question. And Gerald, because he had long since stopped paying attention to the woman who kept his entire world running, didn't notice that the woman pouring his coffee was no longer the same woman he'd married. The following Monday, Nadine drove downtown and sat in the office of attorney Faye Mitchell, a sharp, deliberate woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a reputation for dismantling men who thought they were smarter than paperwork. Nadine placed her phone on the desk and showed the photographs she'd taken of every document in the briefcase. Attorney Mitchell studied them one by one, her expression tightening with each page. She set the phone down and removed her glasses. "The LLC transfer," the attorney said slowly, "requires spousal consent for jointly held properties in this state. Do you see your signature anywhere on these documents?" Nadine shook her head. "That's because it's not there. He filed these transfers without your knowledge and without your legal consent, which means every single one of them is legally defective. They can be challenged, frozen, and reversed." Nadine nodded. "Do you want me to file now?" "No," Nadine said. Her voice was calm. "Not yet. I need him to believe everything is normal for a little while longer." Attorney Mitchell studied her for a long moment. Then she leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, and said, "Tell me what you're thinking." Nadine told her about the party. Gerald's 40th, 100 guests, business partners, church members, family, neighbors. She told her she'd volunteered to cook every dish herself. She told her she'd started the guest list weeks ago, and that certain names were on it for a very specific reason. Attorney Mitchell took off her glasses and set them on the desk. "You're not planning a party, Nadine. You're planning a stage." Nadine looked at her without blinking. "I'm planning the last meal I'll ever cook for that man. I want it to be one he never forgets." Over the next 2 months, Nadine moved like a woman building a house no one else could see. She sent invitations. Gerald approved the guest list without reading it carefully. He was too busy coordinating with Shayla to notice the fine print of his own birthday. He didn't notice that Pastor Burnett had been invited, the man whose opinion carried more weight in their community than any judge's gavel. He didn't notice that Reggie Cole and Winston Pryor, his 2 most important business partners, had been personally called by Nadine and asked to attend as special guests of honor. He didn't notice that Dorothy Vance, the president of their homeowners association, had RSVP'd within an hour of receiving the invitation. And he certainly didn't notice that Nadine had invited one guest whose name wasn't on the printed list. Someone who would arrive quietly, sit in the back, and wait for a signal only Nadine would give. Meanwhile, Gerald grew looser, more careless. He started taking phone calls from Shayla in the living room instead of behind his closed office door. One evening, Nadine heard him laughing and saying, "She's so focused on this party she can't see what's right in front of her. It's almost sad." Shayla's voice came through the speakerphone, muffled but clear enough. "Won't your wife be at the party?" Gerald's answer came without hesitation, without shame, without lowering his voice. "She'll be in the kitchen where she belongs." Nadine was standing in the hallway, just outside the doorframe, a dish towel folded in her hands. She heard every word, every syllable. Her face didn't change, not a twitch, not a blink. She turned around, walked back to the kitchen, and continued rolling out pie crust with steady, measured hands. In the weeks before the party, Shayla grew bolder too. She started posting photos on social media, from inside Gerald's car, from his favorite restaurant booth, from the hallway of what was clearly a luxury apartment with downtown views. She never tagged Gerald directly, but the details were there for anyone paying attention. The leather seat of his Escalade, the gold cufflink on the table, the corner of a monogrammed briefcase visible in one shot. Nadine saw every post. She screenshotted each one and added them to a folder on her phone labeled Receipts. 12 days before the party, Nadine stood in the kitchen, writing out the final menu by hand. The briefcase was sitting on the counter where Gerald had left it that morning. She glanced at it once and then looked away. She didn't need to open it anymore. Everything inside had been photographed, documented, and hand-delivered to an attorney who was sharpening pencils and drafting motions. Nadine picked up her pen and turned back to the menu. She had 100 people to feed, and after that night, she would never cook for Gerald Teague again. The party was everything Gerald wanted it to be, until it wasn't. After the kitchen humiliation, after Shayla took her seat, after Vivian adjusted the napkin like a woman welcoming a new daughter, after the room went silent, and then, slowly, uncomfortably, tried to restart its conversations, Nadine stood in the kitchen doorway for a long moment before stepping fully inside. Her best friend, Corinne, was right behind her. Corinne was shaking. Her jaw was tight. Her hands were balled at her sides, and her eyes were wet with a fury she wasn't trying to hide. "Nadine, I swear to God, if you don't say something to that man right now, I will walk out there and say it for you." Nadine looked at her, calm, steady, like a woman standing in the eye of a storm she'd already mapped. "Not yet. Sit down, eat, enjoy the food." Corinne stared at her. "How are you this calm? How are you standing here like nothing happened?" Nadine didn't answer. She untied her apron slowly, folded it with the same care she'd fold a letter, and set it on the counter beside the sink. She washed her hands under warm water. She dried them with a cloth towel. She fixed her hair using the faint reflection in the side of a stainless steel pot. Then she walked back into the dining room. She didn't go to the main table. She didn't approach Gerald. She didn't look at Shayla. She walked to a small two-person table near the back wall, a table that had been set but left empty because nobody wanted to sit that far from the music and the toasts and the spotlight. Nadine sat down, unfolded the napkin, placed it across her lap, and began eating her own food with the kind of quiet dignity that made noise feel rude and eye contact feel like interruption. The shift didn't happen all at once. It started with glances. A woman at table 4 leaned toward her husband and whispered something, while looking at Nadine. A man near the bar set his drink down and turned his chair slightly in her direction. Two women at table 9 exchanged a look that said everything without saying a word. The jazz quartet started a new song, but the energy in the room had tilted. Something was off-center. Something was wrong with the picture Gerald was trying to paint, and everyone could feel it, even if they couldn't name it. A guest named Clara, a woman from church who'd known Nadine for 15 years, stood up from table 7 and walked across the room. She bent down beside Nadine's table and said quietly, "That red velvet cake is the best thing I've tasted in 10 years, and you deserve to eat it at whatever table you choose." Nadine thanked her. Clara didn't leave. She pulled out the empty chair and sat down. Then another woman came. Then a man holding his plate with both hands like an offering. Then a small cluster of people drifted from Gerald's side of the room to Nadine's corner. Chairs scraped across the hardwood, plates balanced on forearms, conversations rebuilt around a table that 5 minutes ago had been invisible. What had been the emptiest table in the room was becoming its center of gravity. Gerald noticed. He was mid-sentence with Reggie Cole when his eyes tracked across the room and landed on the crowd, forming around his wife. His smile didn't drop, but it tightened at the corners like a rubber band pulled one turn too far. He raised his wine glass. "Everybody, I just want to say—" But the room didn't turn, not all of it. A few heads looked his direction. Most stayed where they were, near Nadine. Gerald set the glass down slowly. He leaned toward Shayla and whispered, "Why is she just sitting there like that?" Shayla didn't answer. She was watching Nadine too, and for the first time that evening, the confident smirk that had been sitting on her face since she walked through the front door had softened into something less certain, something closer to doubt. Vivian, 2 seats away, folded her hands in her lap and stared at the centerpiece flowers like she was trying to disappear into them. Nadine looked across the room and caught Gerald's eye. She held his gaze for 3 full seconds, the kind of seconds that stretch wide enough for a man's entire confidence to fall into. And then she looked away. Not down, away, toward the window, like he wasn't worth the 4th second. Gerald had spent the whole night making sure Nadine knew her place, but the room was starting to decide for itself where she belonged. It was close to 10 o'clock when Gerald stood again. The party had entered that late evening rhythm where plates were half cleared, conversations had gone loose and warm, and the music was playing more for the room's comfort than its attention. Gerald tapped his glass with a butter knife. The room gave him what was left of its attention. "I want to thank every single person who made tonight possible," he said. His voice was smooth, practiced, the voice of a man who knew how to hold a room. He swept his arm wide and thanked his business partners by name. He thanked the venue staff. He thanked his mother for always believing in me. He thanked Shayla for her incredible support and her vision. He lifted his glass. He did not say Nadine's name, not once. The woman who had spent 3 days and 72 hours cooking every single thing these people put in their mouths. He erased her from the evening like she was a line item on a receipt he'd already filed away. Corinne, seated near the back, gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles went pale. Clara put a hand on Corinne's arm and held it there. Gerald finished his toast. The room offered thin, polite applause. A few glasses clinked without enthusiasm. And then, before the noise could settle, before Gerald could sit down and return to the comfort of being the center of his own story, Nadine stood up. She didn't rush. She didn't raise her voice. She rose from her small table in the back of the room the way a witness rises in a courtroom, with purpose, with composure, and without a single apology in her posture. "If I could have just a moment," she said. Her voice was clear, steady, pitched just loud enough that the back tables could hear without the front ones feeling like they were being shouted at. Gerald's face went still. His hand was still holding the wine glass, and his knuckles turned the same shade of white as the tablecloth. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," Nadine said. "I spent 3 days preparing the food you ate this evening, and it means a great deal to me that you came, that you stayed, that you enjoyed it." She paused. Let the silence gather. "I also have a birthday gift for Gerald, something I've been preparing for quite some time." She walked toward the gift table. Gerald's eyes tracked her the way a trapped animal watches a door it can't reach. His hand found the back of his chair like he needed something solid beneath him. Nadine picked up the briefcase. The room didn't understand yet, but Gerald did. The blood left his face the way water drains from a tub, slowly at first, then all at once. "Nadine," he started. She turned the combination dial, 0914, their wedding anniversary. The latch clicked open, and the sound carried across the silent room like a bone snapping under pressure. She reached inside and pulled out the property transfer documents. She held them up so the room could see the pages, the signatures, the notary stamps. Then she began to speak. She spoke the way she cooked, with care, with precision, with nothing wasted and nothing missing. She told the room that Gerald had transferred every jointly owned rental property, 3 buildings they had purchased, financed, and managed together, into a new LLC without her knowledge or consent. She named the LLC aloud, Teague Marshall Holdings. She told them the co-signer on every document was a woman named Shayla Marshall, the same woman currently sitting in Nadine's chair at the head of the table. A sound moved through the room, not a gasp exactly, but a collective tightening, like 100 people had inhaled at the same time and forgotten to let go. Nadine kept going. She told them about the prenuptial amendment Gerald had pre-drafted, a document designed to strip her of every equity claim on properties she had helped purchase, helped maintain, helped build into something worth stealing. She told them the amendment was scheduled to be presented to her right after tonight's party, when he assumed she'd be too grateful and too exhausted to read the fine print. Then she said, quietly but clearly, "And the luxury apartment downtown, the one leased under Ms. Marshall's name, was funded by a personal loan of $62,000, co-signed by Gerald's mother, Vivian Teague." Vivian's chin dropped. Her hand came up to her chest. She looked at Gerald. Gerald was staring at the briefcase like it had caught fire in his hands. The room wasn't just silent now. It was frozen. The jazz quartet had stopped playing. A server near the kitchen stood motionless with a tray of empty glasses balanced on one hand. Even the candles on the tables seemed to burn lower, as if the air itself had gone still. Nadine reached the final page. She told the room what the county clerk's office had confirmed 6 weeks ago. Gerald had filed every property transfer without the required spousal consent form. Every transfer was legally defective. Every document was void. The properties still belonged to both of them under the original title, and the LLC existed only on paper that wasn't worth the ink. Gerald's mouth opened and closed. His lips moved, but no sound came out. He looked like a man who had rehearsed 100 conversations and suddenly realized he was in one he'd never prepared for. A woman stood up in the back of the room. She was dressed simply, dark blouse, neat slacks, and carried a leather portfolio. She had been sitting alone all evening, noticed by no one. She walked calmly to the main table and introduced herself as a paralegal from the law offices of Fay Mitchell. She placed a manila envelope in front of Gerald. "These are preliminary legal filings regarding the dissolution of your marriage and a forensic audit of your shared assets," she said. Her voice was professional and flat. "You have been formally served." Shayla pushed her chair back hard enough that the legs scraped against the floor. She grabbed her clutch and moved toward the exit in quick, unsteady steps. But Pastor Burnett was standing near the door, not blocking it, just standing there. And the way he looked at her, with a heavy, measured calm that carried the weight of every Sunday sermon he'd ever given about truth and accountability, made her stop. She turned, walked back to a chair along the wall, and sat down with the clutch pressed against her chest, her eyes fixed on the floor. Gerald turned to his mother. Vivian was staring at her own hands like she was seeing them for the first time. She didn't look up. She didn't speak. The woman who had spent months undermining Nadine's confidence, who had funded another woman's apartment while telling Nadine she wasn't enough, sat in her chair like a statue that had just realized it was made of sand. The briefcase sat open on the table. Its contents were spread out under the warm chandelier light for every guest in that room to see. The locks Gerald had guarded for years were undone. The secrets he'd carried so carefully had been unfolded, read aloud, and laid bare in front of the people whose respect he needed most. For 10 full seconds, nobody in that ballroom made a sound. The only noise was the faint clink of ice settling in a water glass somewhere near the back of the room. Gerald leaned forward. His voice came out as a whisper, but the room was so quiet that it carried to every table. "Nadine, we can talk about this at home." Nadine looked at him, steady, clear, unmoved. "We could have," she said. "6 months ago. You chose the kitchen instead." She set the briefcase down on the table, still open, and walked back to her seat in the back of the room. She picked up her glass of water, took a slow sip, and placed it back on the table. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The party was over. Gerald Teague just didn't know it yet. The week after the party, Gerald's world began folding in on itself like a house built on a cracked foundation. Reggie Cole called first. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't lecture. He simply said, "I think it's best if we step back from the Eastland partnership. I need to work with people whose judgment I trust." Gerald tried to explain. Reggie cut him off gently. "Gerald, I was in that room. I ate food your wife spent 3 days making. Then I watched you drag her to the kitchen. There is nothing you can say to me right now that I want to hear." Winston Pryor followed 2 days later. Same distance, same finality. Gerald lost 2 anchor clients inside of a week, men who had shaken his hand, praised his vision, and watched him erase his wife in the same breath. Word moved through Mount Calvary Baptist Church the way it always does, in whispers after service, in parking lot conversations that went quiet when the wrong person walked past, in prayer requests that didn't name names but didn't need to. Pastor Burnett never made a public statement. He didn't need to. Gerald was quietly removed from the deacon board. The notification came by letter. It was short, unsigned, and final. Shayla's name was now permanently attached to every property document referenced in the legal filing. Her employer, a corporate real estate firm that valued discretion and reputation above everything, flagged the association during a routine background review. She was called into a closed-door meeting on a Tuesday morning. She walked out 40 minutes later, carrying a cardboard box of personal items and no severance letter. She wasn't terminated for cause. She was released from her contract. The kind of language that sounds clean, but leaves a stain that follows you into every job interview for the next 5 years. She called Gerald that night. He didn't answer. She called again the next morning. He blocked her number. She sent a text from a different phone. He blocked that one too. Shayla had entered Gerald's life the same way she'd entered that party, walking in like she belonged, sitting down like she'd been expected, smiling like the room was hers. And she was discarded the same way Nadine had been humiliated, silently, without explanation, without a single word of acknowledgement or apology. The only difference was that nobody adjusted a napkin for Shayla on her way out. Vivian tried next. She called Nadine 3 times in one day. Nadine let each call ring until it stopped. Vivian left one voicemail. Her voice was thin and practiced. "Honey, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. I was just trying to help Gerald with his finances. I didn't know what the money was being used for." Nadine listened to the voicemail once. She didn't play it again. Vivian called Gerald next and told him to fix this mess before the entire family falls apart. For the first time in 40 years, Gerald raised his voice at his mother. He told her she had no right to call, that she'd made everything worse, that she should have stayed out of it from the very beginning. Vivian went silent on the other end of the line. Then she hung up. She didn't call back. Their relationship, which had been tight and unquestioned for 4 decades, cracked down the center like a windshield that had held its shape through 100 small impacts, but finally gave way to the cold. Gerald showed up at the house on a Thursday evening. He parked in the driveway the way he always did, right in the center, taking up both spaces, because that was the kind of man Gerald had always been. He walked to the front door and turned the knob. It didn't move. The locks had been changed. A small white envelope was taped to the door with his name written on it in Nadine's handwriting. The same careful, steady handwriting that had once addressed their wedding invitations. Inside was a letter from attorney Faye Mitchell, divorce filing, full forensic audit of marital finances. The LLC had been frozen pending judicial review. Every asset, every account, every backdoor transfer Gerald had tried to bury was now laid open under the bright, unforgiving light of the legal system. Gerald stood on his own porch, holding a letter that told him his life was being disassembled, one document at a time. He walked back to his car and sat in the driver's seat with the door still open. The briefcase was on the passenger seat. He reached over and unlatched it out of habit. It was empty. He stared at the leather interior, at the gold monogram he'd once thought made him look powerful and important. And for the first time in his adult life, Gerald Teague had no plan, no angle, no next move, and no one left to call. 6 months passed. Nadine moved into a smaller place, a 2-bedroom bungalow on a tree-lined street with a sunlit kitchen, hardwood floors that creaked in the hallway, and a backyard just big enough for a garden. She chose the house herself. She walked through it alone. She signed the papers with her own name. No co-signer, no LLC, no locked briefcase full of secrets. She paid for it with her share of the divorce settlement, which had returned to her every dollar, every property share, and every cent Gerald had tried to hide inside documents he thought she'd never read. On a bright Saturday morning in early October, Nadine was in her kitchen again. But this time, there was no 100-person guest list, no 3-day cooking marathon, no performance, no audience. She was making brunch for 12, Corinne, Clara, and a circle of women who had shown up for her during the hardest months. Women who brought her groceries when she didn't feel like leaving the house. Women who sat with her in silence when silence was all she had the energy for. Women who never once told her to forgive before she was ready. The table was set with yellow wildflowers from her garden. Music played softly from a small speaker on the windowsill. Anita Baker, because Nadine always said Anita understood what it meant to love someone completely and still find the strength to let them go. The front door was propped open. The screen door let in a breeze that smelled like fresh-cut grass and something warm rising from the oven. There was a small brass hook beside the front door where Nadine's apron hung, the same apron she'd worn the night of Gerald's party. She hadn't thrown it away. She'd washed it by hand, pressed it flat with a hot iron, and hung it where she'd see it every time she walked in or out of her own home. Not as a reminder of what had been done to her, as proof of what she had walked through and come out the other side of, as evidence that a woman can carry the weight of betrayal without letting it crush the part of her that still knows how to laugh. When the women arrived, the house filled with the kind of laughter that doesn't need a reason, the kind that starts in the belly and doesn't stop to apologize for being too loud. Corinne told a story that made Clara spit out her orange juice. Two women argued over the right amount of hot sauce for eggs and nearly knocked a pitcher off the counter. Nadine laughed too, a real, unguarded, full-body laugh that came from somewhere so deep it surprised even her. She hadn't heard that sound from her own mouth in years. That evening, after the dishes were washed and the last guest had hugged her at the door and driven away, Nadine sat on her front porch with a cup of chamomile tea. The street was quiet. The sky had turned that deep shade of blue that only comes in the first hour after sunset. The light from her kitchen spilled through the window and made the front yard glow soft gold. A car passed slowly, a dark sedan with tinted windows. It slowed as it approached her house, then stopped for just a moment at the curb. Gerald was behind the wheel. Through the kitchen window, he could see the table still set with flowers, the apron hanging by the door, the warm light filling every corner of a home that didn't have his name on it. He could see the shape of the life Nadine had built without him. Smaller, quieter, and full of people who actually wanted to be there. People who came because they were invited, not because they were performing. He sat there for a long moment. His hands were on the steering wheel. The passenger seat was empty. No briefcase, no papers, no plans. Then he pulled away from the curb and drove into the dark. Slowly, the way a man drives when he has nowhere to go and no one waiting when he gets there. Nadine didn't see the car. She didn't need to. She was already past him. She sipped her tea, listened to the crickets beginning their evening chorus, and let the cool night close around her like a blanket she'd chosen for herself. Nadine never raised her voice. She never threw a plate. She never begged. She simply waited until the truth was ready. And then she let it speak for itself. Some women fight back with fury. Nadine fought back with patience. And patience, when it's backed by proof, is the most powerful thing in the world. If this story reminded you of someone who stayed quiet when the world expected them to scream, share it with them. And if you want more stories about the strength it takes to walk away with your dignity, I'll be right here.